Hey, what's up guys? John here. Something very interesting is happening in the Florida real estate market. Something very, very, very interesting. I sold my home in Los Angeles and I purchased a property here in Florida. I'm loving Florida. My family is loving Florida. A lot of people are moving to Florida all across the country, especially in markets like New York and California, where you have high taxes, and it's been pretty challenging for many people for their lifestyle and for their businesses to remain in those states, right? So where are they going? They're going to a place like Florida with no income tax. You're seeing people spending $3,000 to $4,000 a month in New York and California. They're saying, hey, for the same money, I can go to Florida, I can buy a property 2-3 blocks from the beach. I can own the property, own the land, and I pay no income tax. It's a win-win-win for me. And a lot of people have done it, right? But something so interesting is happening right now. So you have 9.5 million households in Florida, 9.5 million, population about 20 million, right? So 16%, between 16 and 18%, about 17.2% accurately, are vacant. So out of 6 homes, 1 is vacant throughout the entire state, right? That's massive. About 1.6 million homes are simply just vacant. Now, what I think is kind of very, very interesting and peculiar, and I think that this is what this rug pull looks like, is that we see this rent appreciation. What happens with rents, rising rents? It means that more and more and more attention gets allocated to rental properties because people are making more money, right? Rental properties are sexier than they've ever been because everyone's making a fortune. You're hearing everyone and their mom and taxi drivers talking about Airbnb and making money in real estate, right? Especially in markets like Florida, South Florida. Now, what I think could be interesting here is in a market, in an economy with very low interest rates, what do investors do? In an inflationary environment with low interest rates, they borrow money and they allocate the money into assets that are going to spit off cash, right? Makes sense. But what is going to happen is we're seeing rising interest rates, and at that same time with rising interest rates, imagine if cash flows started going down, meaning that those very properties that they thought were going to continue appreciating, the rents were going to continue appreciating, started depreciating, and the rents started going down when these other homes get filled. Because how long can you leave 1.6 million homes completely vacant? Now imagine this scenario. Let's say, for example, you are a corporate landlord. You have $100 billion in cash, and you want to take over a real estate market. How would you do it? Well, the everyday, person with an IQ of, let's say, 100 or 80 would just say, okay, I'm just going to take the money and I'm just going to buy everything, right? But what other people would do is they would say, hey, I have 100 billion. The guy to the right of me and the lady over here and these people, they all have that same kind of money. Why don't we get together on a call or meet together, and us together, we can control 500 billion in cash or $1 trillion in cash. And what we could do is we could buy these properties. We could buy a bunch of these properties, let them sit vacant. So what ultimately happens is people believe that rents are just going to continue going up. And then what ultimately happens, it builds this bubble. It builds a bubble. And then when interest rates get to a certain point, we can list our properties for rent, taking away a lot of the demand for these other rentals. And then the demand's going to flow into these rentals. The rents are going to come down here, and then these landlords are going to bleed out. And then when those landlords bleed out, we can then either offer to buy out those properties directly or negotiate directly with the banks and say, hey, we know you're sitting on, 400 billion or 500 billion or $50 billion in bad loans, and you could list these properties yourself for sale, but you're going to spend 4 to 5% with realtor fees plus, 1.5% for title and transfer taxes and all that. Or we can just come up together, or one at a time, and we can just buy that block of bad debt from you at, let's say, 60% or 70% or 80% or 90% or whatever it is that we negotiate. But we can buy that debt straight out, and we can control the housing market by doing so, right? Because if you look at that, that's a substantial amount of control. 1.6 million homes in Florida. 1.6 million, the most vacant homes out of the entire country in Florida, that state. You have to ask yourself why. Why would that happen? I lived in California for a very long time. I never wanted to leave California, but a change of situations happened, and here I am. And the same thing is happening with a million other people throughout the country. A lot of people, their whole life changed, everything changed, and they relocated. And most people relocated to places like Texas and Florida and other markets, right? And they're doing it from a place of a very expensive city. They're going from an expensive place and coming here. So for them to spend $2,500 on a one bedroom in Tampa is nothing. It doesn't really matter. It's still 30% less than what they're paying in LA. But for the person that lived in Tampa that was paying $1,350 or $1,500 and now it's $2,500, that is very challenging for them. So that what's actually happening here is we're seeing the middle class get absorbed and forced into this renter nation type of atmosphere. And then what ultimately happens is if interest rates continue to go up and they go up and then it gets more expensive to borrow money and the rents start going down, the landlords start bleeding out, they acquire those properties. But another unique situation is happening is you're also having rising costs across the board. For example, insurance. I was reading an article this morning, a lady was saying, hey, my insurance pricing went from $900 to $1,900, and my second best quote, if I didn't go with that $1,900 quote, was $6,000. So what we're looking at is we're looking at rising costs for home improvement, we're looking at rising costs for insurance, we're looking at rising costs for gasoline and everything else. So what I'm asking myself is, are these prices, these rentals, sustainable? The housing market, are these prices sustainable? Because what I think could happen here is as we start to see people, they have this number of what they're worth in their head. They say, oh, my house is worth $700,000, even if they only owe $350 or $400. But the market starts going down, or that visualization of that equity starts going down. They start losing confidence because they're starting to say, oh, no, I no longer have $300,000 in equity. I have $100,000 or $200,000. Or $150,000, and what ultimately happens is they start pulling back on their spending and they start getting concerned. They might not take the same bets or the same investments that they otherwise would have taken, or the same expansion of their business. It just starts to kind of like to multiply. The fear multiplies. So what I wonder is this all hypothetical? But why would you have 1.6 million homes that are sitting vacant, where property taxes are being paid and expenses are being paid for these properties, when you have no income coming in? Could it be the situation that I just unfolded? Maybe they buy them and they're saying, hey, we're just going to write off losses across these assets for 2 years or 3 years. And then when things get bad enough, then we'll list them all for rent at, let's say, 30% below market. We list them for 30% below market, and we have a 3-bed, 2-bath house, on the other side of the freeway for $1,200, whereas the traditional 1-bedroom that's for $1,500, people are like, hey, I can go for this unit for $1,500, or I can go to a 3-bed house with a couple of my friends. We could all split it and we could reduce our housing cost. It's interesting because if they did do that, you just think about the amount of power and the return on their money for being patient for a couple of years. Something's up. 1.6 million homes at a $9.5 million, something is definitely up. I don't think that, just 1.6 million people are just like, hey, I'm just going to move and let my house sit vacant and not rent them. I'm just going to, let it sit. You have to ask yourself why. We've all heard, even with Bloomberg, they said America should become a nation of renters, right? If you're not careful and you just get caught up in, following the herd, then mistakes happen, right? And I've been talking about this, especially big concerns in Florida, especially around the insurance pricing, because I read an article about the CEO of Redfin. He said that we're going to start to see rising insurance prices go up to a point to where banks are going to be more cautious about lending, especially in places like South Florida, because of the change that's happening with climate and everything else, right? That's what they're saying. So all of those different costs, everything that he's saying in this article is what he's saying is that banks are going to really tighten up and they're no longer going to lend there, meaning that values would fall even further. What he's saying is purely speculation, but he is the CEO of Redfin. I'm sure he is probably rubbing shoulders with some big decision makers, and he's probably getting intel or information from people that are worth a lot more than most other people, and they have a lot more power than most people. So I'm sure it's not just a random thought from left field, but something interesting is happening. 1.6 million homes at a $9.5 million. What do you think the reason is of this? Do you think we are seeing a situation where corporations are looking at this as a huge opportunity, a huge moment to where they can literally just control the housing market? I think something fishy is here. Something very fishy is happening. But I'm curious as to what you think. Do you think we're going to see a situation where markets like let's say Los Angeles and New York might not be as affected because we're actually seeing more people leaving these markets than going. And because of that, what's ultimately happening is we're seeing probably less demand for properties, but they're more challenging to build in these markets because of regulations and everything that they're doing there, meaning that their supply is actually more fixed. So it's going to be harder to replicate and duplicate properties there. So it might make more sense for people just to hold properties there. They might not see the turbulence, but who knows? Everything's very, very uncertain, especially with rental properties. I would not buy rental properties in those locations, but a primary residence, let's see. Where do you think? What do you think about all this? 1.6 million homes out of 9.5 million are vacant. Drop your comments below. Let me know your thoughts about this. Let's have a conversation about it. Do you think we're seeing a big rug pull or a very unique situation? Drop below. Subscribe here. Consider subbing on my second channel and also on TikTok where I post 4 or 5 times a day. I'll catch you guys later.